It was a warm Friday evening, the kind of night when the city lights began to sparkle like tiny stars on the ground. The restaurant called La Belle Maison was already filling up with customers. People came in wearing elegant suits and shiny dresses, laughter echoing between the tables. The smell of roasted garlic, fresh bread, and sizzling steak filled the air. It was a normal evening for everyone, except that something unforgettable was about to happen. Alicia stood behind the counter, adjusting her apron and tying her curly hair into a neat bun. She had worked at this restaurant for almost a year, and she knew every table, every menu item, and every little secret of the place. She wasn't just good at her job, she was excellent. She had a way of smiling that made even the grumpiest customers soften a little, and she could carry 3 plates at once without spilling a drop. But tonight Alicia was tired. She had already finished a morning shift at a cafe before coming here. She worked double shifts almost every day, saving money for her college fees. Her dream was to go back to school and finish her degree in linguistics. She loved languages, every word, every sound. To her, they were like music, but for now, she had to keep working, keep smiling, and keep moving. The restaurant buzzed with life. A group of businessmen were laughing too loudly near the bar. A couple on a date whispered sweetly to each other in the corner, and soft jazz music floated through the air. Alicia checked her table list for the night. Table 7. Her first guests were already seated. She grabbed her notepad, took a deep breath, and walked over. "Good evening, everyone," she said warmly. "My name's Alicia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice was calm and polite, the kind of voice that made people feel welcome. The guests smiled back, ordering drinks and appetizers. Alicia moved quickly between tables, balancing trays like a dancer moving through a stage. Her co-workers admired her focus. "You never stop, do you?" one of them joked. Alicia just laughed and said, "Bills don't pay themselves," and went back to work. Between serving, she looked out the big glass windows. The streets outside were glowing with car lights and city energy. Sometimes she dreamed about being out there, traveling, learning languages, maybe working for an embassy someday. She imagined walking through airports, greeting people from different countries in their own language. But then a customer called, and she snapped back to reality. Hours passed. The kitchen grew louder as orders piled up, and waiters rushed around like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Alicia didn't complain even when her feet hurt. She knew hard work wasn't forever. It was just a step toward something bigger. Every plate she served was a small piece of her journey. As the clock hit 8, Alicia noticed a group of men entering the restaurant. They looked powerful, expensive suits, gold watches, and the confident kind of laughter that made heads turn. They were led by a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He had that air of someone who expected to be admired wherever he went. Alicia didn't think much of it. Guests like that came in often, usually for business dinners. She kept her friendly smile and greeted them at their table.
"Good evening, gentlemen," she said. "Would you like to start with some drinks?"
The men looked at her, and the leader, the tall man, smirked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he whispered something to the man beside him, who chuckled quietly. Alicia waited patiently, pen ready, still smiling. She didn't know it yet. But this man was Mr. Wallace, a wealthy CEO known for his arrogance. To him, restaurant staff were invisible, just background characters in his important world. Tonight, however, he was about to meet someone who would change that view completely. For now, Alicia simply took their orders with grace. She wrote neatly, repeated everything to confirm, and walked back toward the counter behind her. She could hear the men's laughter again, loud and careless. She ignored it, focusing instead on making sure their meals would be perfect. The kitchen doors swung open and closed as she passed through them. The heat, the smell, the sound of sizzling pans, it all blended into the rhythm of her night. The chefs yelled orders, waiters shouted for space, and Alicia, calm and centered, kept everything under control. A few minutes later, she returned to the table with their wine. Balancing the tray like it weighed nothing, she set the glasses down gently, each in front of the right person. The tall man watched her the whole time, a small smirk still playing on his lips. There was something mocking in his eyes, but Alicia didn't notice. She was too busy making sure everything was perfect. She walked away again, her shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. Her back straight, her head high. She didn't know that her quiet confidence was being observed and tested. Outside, the night deepened. A soft rain began to fall. tapping against the glass windows like distant applause. Inside, the restaurant glowed with golden light. Filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smooth sound of jazz, it was just another night. An ordinary shift, or so everyone thought. Alicia stopped for a moment near the counter. Stretching her fingers and letting out a small sigh, she looked around. Tables full, people happy, everything running smoothly. She didn't know that in a few minutes, one man's cruel joke would turn this ordinary night into the most extraordinary moment of her life. Alicia didn't know that her next table would turn her night upside down. She noticed them again, the group of men laughing loudly in the corner. Their voices were heavy with confidence, the kind that fills a room even when you don't want it to. The tall man, the one with silver hair and an expensive watch, sat at the center of attention. His name was Mr. Wallace, the kind of man people recognized from business magazines. He was a CEO of a big tech company, known for his millions, his bold attitude, and his bad habit of making everyone feel smaller than him. As Alicia approached, she could already sense their energy. It wasn't the warm, friendly kind. It was the kind that tested people, mocked them just for amusement. Still, she straightened her posture, adjusted her apron, and walked forward with her usual grace. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, smiling politely. "Would you like to start with some drinks?" The men turned to her, and for a moment there was silence. Then Wallace gave a small smirk, his sharp eyes scanning her from head to toe. "You sound too proper for a waitress," he said, his tone half teasing, half insulting. The others chuckled, sipping their wine. Alicia kept her smile. "Thank you, sir," she replied calmly. "I like to do my job well." Wallace leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the little power he thought he had. "Doing it well won't make you rich, though, will it?" he said loudly so that even nearby tables could hear. His colleagues laughed again. Inside, Alicia felt a sting, but she didn't show it. She had seen this type before. Men who thought money made them untouchable. She refused to give them what they wanted. Which was a reaction. Instead, she asked again, "May I bring you something to drink, sir?" Wallace looked at her for a long moment, then smirked wider. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "I like confident people." Then he turned to his friends. "Don't you think confidence looks strange when it comes from someone like her?" The table laughed again. Alicia felt her hands tighten slightly around her notepad, but she took a slow breath and stayed composed. She knew people like him didn't deserve her anger, only her calm. She quietly took their drink orders and walked away, but she could still hear them laughing, their voices like nails scratching the back of her patience. In the kitchen, one of the chefs noticed her face. "You okay?" he asked, wiping his hands. "I'm fine," she said softly, forcing a small smile. "Just another customer." She wasn't fine, though. She hated when people treated her like she was less, as if the apron erased everything else she was. They didn't know she'd studied at one of the best universities in the country. They didn't know she could speak 9 languages fluently. They didn't know how hard she had worked to get where she was. But that was the thing. Alicia didn't need them to know. She just needed to keep her dignity. Back at the table, the men were halfway through their first bottle of wine. Their laughter got louder. Their jokes got cheaper. Alicia returned to refill their glasses, moving with quiet confidence. Wallace grinned as she approached. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "Let's make this interesting." The other men looked at him curiously. Wallace leaned forward on the table, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Tell you what, miss," he said. "If you can serve me in Chinese, I'll give you $100,000. The table burst into laughter. It wasn't friendly laughter, it was mocking, cruel. Alicia froze for half a second, her tray still in her hand. Her mind raced. Was this a joke? An insult? A test? One of the men snorted. "Come on, Wallace." "That's too easy," another added. "She probably doesn't even know how to say hello in Chinese." Alicia looked at them calmly. She could feel her heart beating faster. But not from fear, from something deeper, a quiet, burning pride. She slowly placed the tray on the edge of the table, her movement smooth, careful. She looked straight into Wallace's eyes, her expression steady. Then with a calm voice she began to speak, not in English, but in perfect Mandarin, her tone soft yet confident. Her pronunciation flawless, she asked politely, "Sir, would you prefer jasmine tea or oolong tea to start your meal?" The entire table fell silent. The laughter died instantly. The air felt heavier. Even the background music seemed to fade for a moment. Wallace blinked, confused. His friends looked at each other. Whispering, one of them even asked quietly, "Wait, was that Chinese?" Alicia continued, this time switching to Cantonese. Her voice carried the natural rhythm of someone who had lived the language. "We also have freshly brewed green tea if you'd like something lighter," she added. The men stared at her as if they had just seen a ghost. Wallace's smirk vanished completely. He leaned forward, his arrogance melting into disbelief. You actually speak Chinese?" he asked slowly. Alicia tilted her head slightly, smiling politely. "Yes, sir," she said. "Would you like me to continue in Mandarin or Cantonese?" For a few seconds there was silence again. Then, somewhere in the restaurant, a soft chuckle broke out from another table that had overheard. It was the sound of quiet satisfaction. Wallace didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at her like he'd been caught in his own trap. Alicia, without missing a beat, poured his wine gently, thanked them for their order, and walked away gracefully. Behind her, the table remained silent. The men who had laughed so loudly minutes ago now sat speechless. Embarrassed in the kitchen, Alicia took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The noise of the restaurant returned, the clinking glasses, the soft music, the chatter. But something inside her felt lighter, stronger. She had faced arrogance with elegance, ignorance with intelligence, and she didn't need applause to feel proud. She just kept working, quietly, beautifully, like she always did, unaware that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The air around the table felt heavier now. The laughter that once echoed through the restaurant had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Alicia had walked away after speaking flawless Mandarin and Cantonese, leaving the group of businessmen staring at each other like they had seen a ghost. Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair, trying to act casual, but his face was slightly red. He took a sip of wine to hide his embarrassment. His friends tried to lighten the mood with nervous laughter, yet the tension stayed, thick and unshakable. Alicia returned a few minutes later. Carrying their appetizers, her movements were calm, precise, the very picture of grace. She placed each plate gently in front of them, never losing her smile, her eyes calm and steady, didn't reveal a single trace of anger or pride. "Here you are, gentlemen," she said softly. "Please enjoy your meal." For a moment, nobody spoke, then Wallace cleared his throat, trying to bring back his old arrogance. "You know," he said, forcing a laugh. "I was just joking earlier." He looked up at her, waiting for some kind of reaction. Alicia simply nodded. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice respectful but distant. "Would you like another bottle of wine?" Wallace blinked, caught off guard by her composure. Sure, yes," he said quickly, "the same one." She nodded again and turned to leave. Her steps were quiet but full of strength. Wallace watched her go, his pride twisting inside him like a thorn. He had spent years surrounded by people who flattered him, laughed at his jokes, and treated him like royalty. But this woman, this waitress, had just shattered his image with a few simple words spoken in a language he didn't even understand. When Alicia came back with the wine, one of the other men, a younger executive, leaned forward and asked, "Excuse me, miss. That was really impressive. Did you actually study Chinese?" Alicia smiled. "Yes, sir," she replied, "and a few others too." "How many?" he asked, his tone curious, not mocking. "9 in total," she said softly as she poured their drinks. "Languages are my passion," Wallace scoffed quietly. 9 languages? He muttered under his breath. "That's hard to believe." Alicia looked at him, her expression still calm. "I believe knowledge is meant to be shared, not shown off," she said. "When you love something, you learn it fully." Her words hit deeper than she intended. Wallace didn't know how to respond. He had spent his life believing that power came from money and position, not from quiet intelligence. For the first time, he felt small, and he hated it. His friends, sensing the awkwardness, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. They talked about business deals, luxury cars, and their weekend plans, but their voices lacked the earlier joy. Every few seconds, someone's eyes would drift toward Alicia as she moved gracefully between tables. Alicia, meanwhile, focused on her work. She served other guests, refilled glasses, and checked orders with the kitchen. Her body was tired, but her spirit was calm. She wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. She had learned long ago that some people mocked what they didn't understand. As the night went on, Wallace found himself watching her more often, not with arrogance this time, but with curiosity. Who was she really? How could someone working as a waitress carry herself with such quiet power? It confused him, almost unsettled him. When Alicia returned with dessert menus, Wallace decided to speak again. "You know," he began, "you surprised me earlier." "Did I, sir?" she said, looking at him politely. "Yes," he replied. "Most people would have just laughed it off, but you actually did it." Alicia tilted her head slightly. "Well, you gave me a challenge," she said. "I simply accepted it." He smiled awkwardly. "You must think I'm a terrible person," he said, half joking, half serious. She paused for a moment, then said gently, "I don't think people are terrible, sir. I think sometimes they just forget that respect is free." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Even the background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade for a moment. The younger executives looked down, pretending to study their menus. Wallace's face softened, a small crack in his armor. Alicia left them to decide on dessert, and as she walked away, one of the men whispered, "Man, she just schooled you without raising her voice." The others laughed quietly, but this time it wasn't cruel. It was admiration disguised as amusement. Wallace chuckled too, shaking his head. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess she did." He leaned back and stared at his wine glass, watching the red liquid swirl inside. For the first time in years, he felt humbled, not by another CEO, not by a rival company, but by a waitress who carried more grace in her silence than he did in his entire career. Alicia continued serving other customers, her thoughts wandering. She remembered her mother's words. "Never let someone else's ignorance change your kindness." That phrase had guided her through many tough nights, and tonight it felt truer than ever. When she returned to bring their check, Wallace spoke again. His tone was softer now. "You know, I'm actually serious about that offer," he said. "I'll give you the $100,000, Alicia blinked, surprised, then smiled gently. "That's very kind, sir," she said. "But I don't need your money." He frowned slightly. "Why not?" "Because the lesson was already paid," she replied. "And it didn't cost a thing with that." She placed the bill on the table and walked away, leaving him speechless once again. Outside, rain drummed softly against the windows. Inside, the restaurant glowed warm and golden. The other guests continued chatting, unaware that something meaningful had just happened at table 7. Wallace sat quietly for a long time, his laughter gone, his thoughts racing. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man in control. He was the one who had been taught something priceless. And as Alicia cleared another table across the room, a soft smile crossed her face. She didn't need applause or recognition. Her strength spoke for itself, louder than any voice in the room. The restaurant had quieted down by now. The rush of dinner hour was fading, leaving behind the soft hum of jazz and the gentle clinking of glasses. Outside, rain traced silver lines down the windows. Inside, everything felt warm and golden, but at table 7, something heavier hung in the air. Alicia returned to the kitchen to drop off a few empty plates. She tried to shake off the moment, telling herself to focus, but part of her mind kept replaying the arrogant smirk on Wallace's face. Not because she was angry, but because she felt sorry for him. She had met people like him before, people who thought power meant being above others, people who didn't understand that true class was measured by kindness, not money. Still, she didn't hold it against him. Alicia had learned that grace wasn't weakness, it was control. The ability to stay calm when others tried to provoke you. That was real strength. As she wiped her hands and took a deep breath, one of her co-workers, Jamie, walked over. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Alicia smiled. "I'm fine. Just another night," she said. But Jamie had seen it too. "That guy's a jerk," he muttered. "If it were me, I'd have walked away." Alicia laughed softly. "That's why I'm me," she said, picking up a tray of desserts. "And you're still on break," Jamie grinned and shook his head. Watching her walk back out into the dining area, her steps were steady, her chin lifted high. There was something about her that made people look twice. Not just her beauty, but the calm dignity she carried, the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. When she reached the table, Wallace was leaning back in his chair, pretending to check his phone, but the tension on his face gave him away. The other men were whispering to each other, trying to act normal. "Dessert, gentlemen?" Alicia asked, her tone polite, gentle, not a hint of sarcasm or bitterness. One of the younger men quickly said, "Yes, please." "The chocolate soufflé looks great." Alicia nodded. Excellent choice, she said, and for the rest of you? They all ordered quietly, avoiding her eyes. All except Wallace, who finally put down his phone and looked at her. He tried to sound casual. You really don't want the money, huh? Alicia shook her head, smiling. No, sir, she said. I just want to do my job well. Wallace raised an eyebrow. You could have just ignored me, he said. Most people would have. Maybe, Alicia replied. But I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, even when they forget to show it. That sentence hit harder than she realized. Wallace looked away for a second, staring at his reflection in the dark wine glass. It wasn't often that someone spoke to him like that, calmly. Without fear, without anger, just truth. The desserts arrived and Alicia set them down carefully. The warm aroma of chocolate and sugar filled the air. Wallace looked up again, and this time, there was no arrogance left, only curiosity. You said 9 languages, he said slowly. That's incredible. Where did you learn all that? Alicia smiled faintly. Here and there, she said. I studied linguistics in college, but I've been learning languages since I was a child. My mother used to say, if you want to understand people, speak to them in their heart's language. One of the men nodded slowly, clearly impressed. That's beautiful, he said. Alicia laughed softly. She was a wise woman, she said. I just followed her advice. For the first time all night, Wallace didn't have a comeback. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a waitress, but as a person. Alicia poured them all coffee, her movement steady and professional. When she handed Wallace his cup, their eyes met. He wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. His pride battled with his conscience, and for once, conscience was winning. She spoke again, her voice low but clear. I've learned that language isn't just words, she said. It's how we treat each other. That's the language everyone understands. The words hung in the air. Soft but powerful. The men looked at her, then at each other. Their earlier laughter seemed distant now, replaced by something closer to respect. Alicia turned to leave, but Wallace finally said, Wait, she stopped and looked back. Yes, sir? He hesitated, then sighed. I've spent years running a company that builds communication tools, he said. But you just reminded me that real communication isn't about technology. He gave a small, almost humble smile. It's about humanity, Alicia nodded, her expression gentle. That's true, sir, she said. We all speak better when we listen first. Then she smiled politely. Enjoy your dessert, she added. Before walking away, Wallace sat there for a long time, the chocolate soufflé untouched in front of him. His friends started eating quietly, trying not to disturb his thoughts. He stared at the door she had walked through, remembering every word, every graceful movement. Something inside him shifted that night. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was realization. The kind that humbles you, the kind that makes you see how much smaller pride looks when compared to grace. Alicia, meanwhile, stood near the counter, writing down another order. She didn't look back, she didn't need to. She knew she had already said everything that needed to be said. Not through argument, not through anger, but through calm strength as she continued working. A small smile stayed on her lips. The rain outside had slowed, leaving the city washed clean under the streetlights. Inside, the restaurant glowed with quiet peace again. For most people, it was just another Friday night. But for one arrogant CEO, and for one humble waitress who spoke 9 languages, it was the night a single act of kindness spoke louder than any words ever could. For a few long seconds, the restaurant seemed to stand still. The clinking of glasses, the quiet jazz music, the sound of rain outside. Everything faded into the background. The air around table 7 felt different, almost electric. Alicia had just walked away after speaking words that cut deeper than any insult ever could. Mr. Wallace sat frozen, his spoon still resting in his dessert. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, not sure whether to speak or stay silent. It wasn't often that anyone, especially a waitress, left him speechless, yet here he was, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. Across the restaurant, a few guests who had overheard bits of the exchange were whispering to each other. A couple smiled softly, impressed by how calmly Alicia had handled everything. One woman at a nearby table whispered, "She's amazing," while her husband nodded. She didn't even raise her voice. Alicia, unaware of the quiet admiration spreading around her, continued doing her work. She cleared dishes, refilled water, and smiled politely at other customers. To her, it was just another shift. Another night to do her best, but to everyone else, it was something more. It was a lesson unfolding in real life. In the corner, Wallace leaned back in his chair and sighed. He stared at the glowing candles on the table, their flickering light dancing across his face. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even embarrassed. He was thinking his friends tried to start small talk again. But the conversation felt forced, empty, like air trying to fill a space that had already changed. So, about that deal in San Francisco, one of them began. But Wallace didn't answer. He was somewhere else in his mind. He kept replaying Alicia's words. Respect is free. We all speak better when we listen first. They sounded simple, but the simplicity made them powerful. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him that way. Without fear or interest, just honesty in the kitchen. Alicia took a moment to breathe. She leaned against the counter. Wiping her hands, Jamie came over. "You're a legend," he whispered. "You have no idea how everyone's talking about what just happened." Alicia laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's nothing, Jamie. I just did my job." "Nothing?" he said, wide-eyed. "You just embarrassed a millionaire with Mandarin. You should be trending right now." Alicia smiled and picked up another tray. "Maybe," she said, "but that's not the kind of fame I want." As she stepped back out onto the floor, she felt the room's energy shift. People looked at her differently now, not as a server, but as someone who had quietly stood up for herself, with elegance, not anger. Wallace watched her as she moved between tables. There was something humbling about the way she carried herself. Steady, confident, without arrogance. He had spent his whole life around people who shouted to be heard, and here was a woman who didn't need to raise her voice at all. He finally stood up, leaving his dessert unfinished, and approached the counter where Alicia was checking the bill folder. For a second, she didn't notice him. When she looked up, she was surprised to see him there. "Sir," she said politely, "is there something wrong with the meal?" He shook his head. "No. Everything was perfect," he said quietly. His voice had lost its sharpness. It was softer now. "I just wanted to say, I was out of line earlier." Alicia paused, then nodded. "Thank you, sir," she said. "That means a lot," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You know, I thought I was testing you," he said, "but I think you were testing me." Alicia smiled. "Maybe life just gave us both a lesson," she said gently. He chuckled. "I guess so," he said. "I've spent years giving motivational speeches to my employees about success. But tonight a waitress taught me more about leadership than any seminar ever did." Alicia's eyes softened. "I'm glad you think that way, sir," she said. "Because leadership isn't about being above people. It's about seeing them." He nodded slowly, her words settling deep in his chest. Then he said, "You mentioned you studied languages, right?" "Yes," she said. "I had to pause my studies, but I'll go back soon." "Then I hope you do," Wallace replied. "You're going to go far." He placed a business card on the counter. "If you ever want to work in international relations or communication, call this number," he said. "I mean it." Alicia looked at the card, but she didn't pick it up. She smiled kindly. "Thank you, sir, that's generous. But I think I'll get there on my own." Wallace looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "I don't doubt that," he said. Not for a second. As he turned to leave, the sound of rain had stopped outside. The city lights reflected softly through the glass, and a faint rainbow glimmered in the distance. The rest of the restaurant watched quietly as he walked out. A few guests clapped subtly, not for Wallace, but for Alicia. She didn't react, just smiled shyly and went back to clearing tables. Later that night, after the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Alicia sat down at an empty table, exhausted but peaceful. She looked around the quiet restaurant and whispered to herself, "Respect really is free." She gathered her things, took one last look at the city through the window and smiled. The night that began with arrogance ended with grace. The same walls that echoed laughter and mockery earlier now held silence, the kind that follows understanding. Alicia walked home in the cool night air, her shoes clicking softly on the wet pavement. The streetlights glowed above her, and for the first time in a while, she felt light. She didn't win a bet, didn't get paid a fortune, but she earned something far greater. She earned her own peace. And somewhere across town, a CEO sat alone in his car, replaying every word she had said, realizing that humility, like language, was something everyone needed to learn. The rain had stopped by the time Alicia stepped out of the restaurant, The air smelled clean, fresh like a new beginning. Her shoes splashed gently against small puddles as she walked down the quiet street. The night lights shimmered across the wet pavement, reflecting the world like a mirror. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, not because of the cold, but because of habit. Life had taught her to protect herself, not just from the weather, but from words, from looks, from judgment. Alicia lived in a small apartment just a few blocks away. It wasn't fancy, but it was home inside. The walls were lined with books, thick dictionaries, language guides, notebooks filled with her handwriting in different scripts, Chinese characters, Arabic calligraphy, French phrases, and Japanese kanji all danced across the pages. She set her bag down, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the city lights blink like tiny stars. The restaurant's noise was gone, replaced by the soft hum of the night. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the silence wrap around her. It had been a long day, but it wasn't just the physical tiredness that weighed on her. It was the memory of that table, of the laughter, of the challenge, and of the quiet shift that followed. Yet deep down she wasn't angry. She felt something else, a strange kind of peace. Her phone buzzed, a message from her younger sister. Mia popped up. "Hey, did you eat?" "Don't skip dinner again." Alicia smiled and texted back, "I did. Don't worry." She looked at her phone screen for a while, a small warmth blooming in her heart. Mia was 16, still in high school, brilliant like her sister. Alicia had taken responsibility for her after their mother passed away 2 years ago. Their father had left when they were little, so Alicia became everything. Big sister, parent, teacher, and provider. Every shift she worked, every tip she earned, every word she spoke, it was all from Mia. Alicia sipped her tea and glanced at a framed photo on the shelf. It was her mother, smiling proudly, holding Alicia's college acceptance letter. She could still remember that day clearly. The sun was shining. Her mother had tears in her eyes. And Alicia had promised, "I'll make you proud, Mom," and she had, at least for a while. She had been a top student at Harvard, studying linguistics and cultural communication. Her professors admired her sharp mind, her passion for understanding people. She spent hours in libraries, learning not just how to speak new languages, but how to feel them. Language, she once told her classmates, isn't just words, it's emotion, it's culture. It's the way someone's heart speaks. But during her second year, her mother fell sick. The hospital bills piled up faster than her scholarship could cover. So Alicia made a decision. She left school, got a full-time job, and promised herself she would return one day. Her mother didn't make it, but before she passed, she held Alicia's hand and whispered, "Don't let life make you bitter, baby. Let it make you better." Those words became Alicia's compass. She started working at the restaurant soon after, balancing long shifts and late-night studying. Every night when she came home, she would sit by the window, open her books, and teach herself a new language phrase by phrase. She learned Mandarin from online lessons, Spanish from YouTube, Arabic from old textbooks, and Japanese from talking to tourists. Her secret dream was to become a global interpreter one day, someone who built bridges between cultures, someone who helped people understand each other. That's why she never lost her patience at work, even when faced with arrogance. Tonight, though, something felt different. That moment with Mr. Wallace had stirred something deep inside her. It wasn't pride, and it was purpose. She realized that every struggle she had faced, every late-night study session, every rude customer she had endured, it all led her here, to this moment where her grace became her power, across town in his luxury apartment. Mr. Wallace sat at his desk, staring at his phone. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. He had built a company that connected millions of people across the world. Yet he had never truly understood connection the way that waitress did. He opened his laptop, searching for her name. It didn't take long. A few clicks and he found her LinkedIn profile. Alicia Moore, linguistics student, fluent in 9 languages. He stared at the screen for a long time, reading her small list of achievements, the ones she never bragged about. He thought about the look in her eyes when she spoke Mandarin. Calm, sure confident. He realized that real power didn't come from wealth or titles. It came from knowing who you are. Meanwhile, Alicia stood by her window. Looking out at the city skyline, she smiled faintly, not knowing that her quiet strength had already begun to ripple through someone else's life. She whispered softly to herself, "One day, I'll finish what I started." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Mia. "I got an A on my French test." Alicia's smile widened. "I knew you would," she typed back. Adding a heart emoji, she closed her books, turned off the lights, and lay down on her bed. The city hummed quietly outside, but her heart was steady, calm. She didn't have the money or the fame or the comfort she once dreamed of. But she had something no one could take: her dignity, her intelligence, her peace. As she drifted off to sleep, one thought crossed her mind. The world often underestimated people like her, but one day they would understand. The girl they once mocked for serving tables spoke 9 languages, and one of them was the universal language of respect. The next morning came with soft sunlight spilling across the city. The rain from the night before had washed everything clean. The streets shimmered under the golden glow, and the air carried that gentle freshness that comes after a storm. In a tall glass apartment overlooking the skyline, Mr. Wallace sat at his breakfast table, untouched coffee in front of him. His mind wasn't on the emails piling up on his phone or the meeting waiting at 9. It was still stuck on one thing: the waitress from last night. Alicia. He didn't know why she stayed in his head. Maybe it was her voice, calm and steady. Maybe it was the way she looked him in the eye without fear. Maybe it was because she had spoken truth without trying to humiliate him. Whatever it was, it lingered. He had met countless people in his life: investors, executives, politicians. But none of them had made him feel so small and yet so alive at the same time. He couldn't stop hearing her words. Respect is free. He looked out the window, his reflection staring back at him through the glass. For years, he had defined success by numbers, profit margins, stock prices, luxury cars, but what did it mean now if he couldn't respect the people who helped build that success? His phone buzzed, pulling him out of thought. His assistant's voice came through. "Sir, you have the board meeting in an hour. Should I prepare the presentation?" Wallace blinked. "Yes," he said quietly. "And cancel my evening appointments." The assistant paused. "All of them?" "All of them," Wallace said. "I need some time to think." He hung up and stared at the city again, sipping his coffee finally. The bitterness didn't bother him. It felt fitting. He thought of Alicia's calm eyes, her steady voice, the way she said she didn't want his money. He realized she had something money couldn't buy: peace, confidence, purpose. Meanwhile, across town, Alicia woke up early. The sunlight danced across her face as she opened her eyes. She stretched, got ready, and made breakfast for herself and Mia. "Morning. Sleepyhead?" she said playfully as her sister walked in, still half asleep. "Morning," Mia mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "You're in a good mood today," Alicia laughed. "Maybe because I didn't spill coffee on anyone yesterday," Mia grinned. "Or maybe because you embarrassed a rich guy with your brain." Alicia almost choked on her toast. "You saw that online?" she asked, surprised. Mia nodded, holding up her phone. "It's everywhere. Someone at the restaurant filmed it. You're famous now." Alicia froze. "You're kidding." "Nope," Mia said, scrolling through her feed. "Look, my waitress shocks arrogant CEO by speaking 9 languages. You're trending." "Sis." Alicia covered her face with her hands, half laughing, half groaning. "Oh no, I didn't want this," she said. "I just wanted to do my job," Mia smiled. "Well, you did more than that. You showed people that kindness doesn't mean weakness," Alicia sighed, shaking her head. "I just hope people take the right message." Back in his office, Wallace was reading the same story on his screen. His company's public relations team had already called him, worried about the video. "Sir, we can release a statement clarifying that it was a misunderstanding," one of them said nervously. Wallace leaned back in his chair. "No," he said, "don't release anything. Leave it as it is." The team was silent for a moment. "Are you sure, sir?" "The video makes you look like a fool," Wallace interrupted. "That's exactly what I was." He ended the call before anyone could respond. For once, he didn't care about image, reputation, or headlines. What mattered was what he had learned. He spent the rest of the day quietly thinking, remembering. Reflecting. By evening, he made a decision. He took out the business card he had given Alicia and looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called the restaurant. "Hello?" "La Belle Maison," the hostess answered cheerfully. "Yes, good evening," Wallace said, his tone polite. "May I speak with Alicia Moore, please?" There was a pause, then the hostess replied, "She's not on shift today, sir. Would you like to leave a message?" He hesitated. No, that's all right, thank you, he said and hung up. He decided he wouldn't reach out yet. Not with words, not with money, instead. He would do something meaningful. 2 days later, Alicia was finishing her shift when her manager called her into the office. Alicia, there's something here for you, he said. Handing her an envelope, she frowned. For me? Yes, he said. It came this morning, no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, neatly typed, and a check. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount. It wasn't 100,000. It was a scholarship fund. The letter read, Miss Moore, you reminded me that success without respect is failure in disguise. This isn't a payment, it's an opportunity. You once said you paused your studies. Consider this a chance to finish them. Thank you for teaching me what no classroom ever could. R. Wallace. Alicia stood there for a long time, holding the letter. Her eyes stung with tears, but she smiled. Not because of the money, but because someone had truly understood. That night, she sat by the same window, tea in hand, city lights glowing outside. She thought about how strange life could be, how one act of arrogance could turn into a lesson of humility. Mia came up behind her, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. You okay? She asked. Alicia nodded. Yeah, she whispered. For the first time in a long while, I think I am. She looked out the window and smiled softly. Sometimes life doesn't shout its lessons. It whispers them through moments, through silence, through kindness, through people who least expect to teach or learn, and somewhere high above the city, in a glass tower, a once proud man sat at his desk, looking out at the same night sky, whispering to himself the same lesson. Respect is free. The sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow on everything it touched. The streets were waking up, buses rumbling, shopkeepers lifting shutters, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. It was a new day, and for Alicia it was the beginning of something she never saw coming. She had finished her morning coffee and was getting ready for her shift when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first she thought it was Mia again, but when she checked, there were dozens of notifications, texts, emails, social media tags, all from strangers. Her name was everywhere. There were headlines that read, Waitress humiliates arrogant CEO with 9 languages, others said. Grace over greed, the woman who spoke respect. People from around the world were sharing the story, commenting with words like inspiration, queen, and true class. Alicia stared at her phone. Half shocked, half amused, she hadn't wanted fame. She had just wanted peace, but somehow, the universe had turned her quiet act of dignity into a message that spread across the world. When she arrived at the restaurant, her coworkers clapped and cheered. Jamie shouted, Our celebrity linguist has arrived, and tossed a napkin in the air like confetti. Alicia laughed, shaking her head. You all are ridiculous, she said, but she couldn't hide the smile spreading across her face. Her manager came out of the office looking proud. Alicia, there are journalists calling for interviews, news channels, podcasts, even a talk show invited you. What? No, I can't do that, Alicia said quickly, waving her hands. I'm just a waitress. The manager smiled kindly. Not anymore, you're a symbol now. Whether you like it or not. You reminded people what grace looks like. She didn't know what to say. The idea of being on television terrified her. But deep down, she knew this was bigger than her now. Later that week, Alicia agreed to appear on a morning show. She wore a simple white blouse, her hair neatly tied back. She wasn't trying to look glamorous, and she wanted to look like herself. When the interviewer asked, What made you respond the way you did that night? Alicia smiled and said softly, Because anger never teaches, but calmness sometimes does. The audience clapped. Some even wiped their eyes. Then the interviewer asked, Is it true you speak 9 languages? Alicia laughed shyly. Yes, I do, she said. But language isn't just about words. It's about understanding people, and sometimes understanding doesn't need translation. That line went viral too. People replayed it, quoted it, painted it on murals. It became a message of empathy in a world that often forgot what kindness sounded like. Back at home, Mia watched every interview proudly. You did it, sis, she said one night, hugging her. You really did it. Alicia smiled and brushed her sister's hair back gently. We did it, she said. You're part of this story too. Meanwhile, in his office, Mr. Wallace watched those same interviews, but not as a man embarrassed, as a man enlightened. He had started a new company project called the Alicia Initiative, a global scholarship fund for students who wanted to study languages and culture. He made a public statement saying, "This young woman taught me that true communication begins with respect." When Alicia heard about it, she was speechless. She didn't expect gratitude, let alone a movement. But she was glad that the lesson had reached further than one man's table. Weeks passed and Alicia's life began to change. Universities reached out offering her scholarships. International organizations sent her invitations. One email stood out. It was from a cultural exchange program in Geneva, offering her a chance to work as a language consultant. She read it twice, her heart racing. Tears filled her eyes as she realized this was it, the opportunity her mother had always wanted her to have. That night she stood by her window again, the same one where she had studied late into the night, the same one she had cried by when she thought her dreams were over. Now those dreams were alive again, brighter than ever. She whispered softly, "We did it, Mom," and smiled. The next morning she packed her bags. Mia helped her fold clothes, laughing and crying at the same time. "Promise you'll call every day," Mia said. "Every single day," Alicia replied, hugging her tightly. "And one day, you'll join me." As she boarded the plane, the sunlight poured through the window, warming her face. She looked down at the city, the streets, the buildings, the restaurant where everything began, and she felt a quiet wave of gratitude. When the plane lifted off, she closed her eyes and thought about that night, about the laughter, the challenge, and the moment she chose calm instead of pride. She realized something powerful. Sometimes life tests you in small moments, moments that look ordinary but carry the weight of destiny. Thousands of miles away, her story continued to spread. Schools played her interview in classrooms. Parents told it to their children. Her calm voice had reached corners of the world she had never seen. In time, people forgot the CEO's name, but they remembered hers. They remembered the girl who spoke 9 languages and taught the world one universal truth: that respect costs nothing, but means everything. Years later, when Alicia walked onto the stage of an international conference to speak as a cultural ambassador, she smiled at the crowd before her and said, "Years ago, I was just a waitress serving coffee. Someone tried to test my worth, but I learned that no one can take away your value if you know it yourself." The audience rose to their feet. Applauding her words, Alicia smiled humbly, her eyes shining, and somewhere in the crowd an older man with silver hair clapped the loudest. Proud to have once learned his most important lesson from a woman who didn't just speak 9 languages. She spoke humanity.